West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
AR-15s, shotguns, tons of pistols, semi-automatic handguns, also bear spray, chemical spray, stun guns, flagpoles, spears, flagpoles made into spears, clubs, collapsible batons, bulletproof vests, crossbows, machetes, smoke grenades, thousands of rounds of ammunition ranging from shotgun shells to hollow point bullets. Plus the nightmare homemade stuff, like these mason jars filled with gasoline and styrofoam. Basically do-it-yourself napalm. Nice that he packed them all together in that tight space. Hit any speed bumps on the way? On Friday, just a few days ago, the Washington Post did a public service. They set several reporters to pull from court filings and public reporting all of the different weapons we now know were at the Capitol on January 6th in the hands of the pro-Trump mob. The Post reported on 121 people ultimately charged with using or carrying dangerous weapons that day. That reporting, of course, follows testimony from White House staffer Cassidy Hutchinson that not only was President Trump warned early on January 6th that the crowds near the Capitol were quite heavily armed, that the people choosing to go through the metal detectors had tons of weapons confiscated from them already. But he was warned that the people choosing not to go through the metal detectors were choosing to avoid them, choosing to avoid going through magnetometers, in part because they wanted to keep their weapons on them. Trump responded to that information, allegedly, by saying that he wanted the metal detectors for his rally taken down, so the crowd wouldn't have to have their guns taken away for them to be able to attend. Because whoever they wanted to use those weapons against, he figured it wasn't him.
I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in.
They're not here to hurt me. Let the people in with weapons. And then we'll go to the Capitol. Again, we have known that information for a couple of weeks because of testimony from White House staffer Cassidy Hutchinson. But that information we can now put in the context of a whole burst of new news about just how armed the crowd was on January 6th. I mean, first we learned from her that Trump knew they were armed. Now we're learning a lot more about how exactly they were armed and how armed they were. I mean, in addition to that Washington Post reporting, which is a real public service, on Friday from the Justice Department, we also got an update in the seditious conspiracy case against the leaders of the Oath Keepers and alleged members of that group. U.S. prosecutors laid out a series of revelations about weapons they say those individuals had brought with them to D.C. on January 6th. Quote, the government has evidence that members of the group from Florida and Arizona allegedly staged semi-automatic rifles and other weapons in a suburban Washington hotel, while a third team from North Carolina kept their firearms ready to go in a vehicle in the parking lot. Quote, another Florida member of the group came to Washington with explosives in his recreational vehicle, which he left parked in College Park, Maryland. The government later seized from that RV, quote, military ordnance grenades. He had them in his RV, which he had used to travel to D.C. on January 6th. All of that is information, I think it's worth noting, that is all information we did not have the first time anybody tried to hold Trump accountable for what he set off on January 6th. During his second impeachment trial right after January 6th, one of the key pieces we now know was missing was just how armed that crowd was when they stormed the Capitol. That makes this kind of fresh new ground. How does it change the job of the investigators? How does it change the stakes? Well, joining us now is somebody in a unique position to be able to talk about that. Barry Berke was counsel to the House Judiciary Committee during President Trump's first impeachment, the one about Ukraine. Then he was lead counsel in President Trump's second impeachment, which was the one about January 6th. Mr. Berke, it is a real pleasure to have you with us here tonight. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Rachel. Great to be here.
Is it fair to say that when Trump was impeached for the January 6th attack, again, for which you were lead counsel, is it fair to say that it wasn't yet clear at that time just how many weapons were among the mob that day, how many weapons, what types of weapons they had brought to D.C., let alone the fact that Trump was aware of how armed they were?
That is all true. There's so much more direct evidence that supports everything we were saying during the impeachment, seeking to prove, and all the circumstantial evidence that we thought proved it. It also shows the lies to all of Trump's defenses. If you remember, during the impeachment, we had him saying to the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. We had him sending out on December 19th the tweet, big protest in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. It will be wild. And we had all the other evidence. What this shows is that everything we were saying was true and then some. Of course, he was summoning these violent domestic extremist groups and should have known and would have known that they were violent. When he stood up there, he knew the crowd that he was encouraging because he had received those warnings. Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony was so great because it explained what preceded it and what followed. He knew they had guns, but didn't care because they weren't seeking to shoot him. And all these folks came prepared. And there's even more evidence of that because they were told the election was being stolen and they were summoned there. And I remember from the second impeachment, one of the most chilling pieces of film that I saw when preparing was the film when the people who raided it told the police, we're here because the president told us to come here and invited us. And that's what they believed. And that's why he is singularly responsible. So it is new evidence and it's powerful, further proof of his responsibility for everything that happened and that January 6th was the culmination of his attempt to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power after all his other efforts had failed.
Now, in terms of the relationship between these pro-Trump fascist paramilitary groups, members of which have been charged with seditious conspiracy, and the culpability of the president, Congressman Raskin, who's going to co-lead tomorrow's hearing, I know you worked with him closely on Trump's second impeachment, he has said that tomorrow's hearing is not going to be about showing explicit evidence that Trump, approved directly of these paramilitary groups' plans or that he told them to draw up plans like that. He said that isn't what they're setting out to prove. They're setting out to prove what he described as a convergence of Trump's efforts and what the paramilitary groups are willing to do with weapons and with violence. Can you help us understand what that means? He's not talking about there being coincidentally pursuing the same idea. He's talking about there being converged efforts.
Absolutely. And I think I can't help but look at this as a trial lawyer because it's so effective to have Cassidy Hutchinson come in as the last witness, say she heard Proud Boys, Oath Keepers mentioned in connection with January 6th. They knew, they were warned there was going to be violence. They knew, and he was warned not to use the words to encourage the crowd to fight. And yet he sent out, the December 19th tweet telling him to be there and be wild. He knew what he was coming. So they're not going to say that he may have had direct conversations with the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys, but it was all happening in real time. At the same time, he was trying to influence state officials, telling him to find the exact amount of votes he needed to win, trying to get his senior DOJ officials just to say, just say there's fraud and he'll take care care of the rest. It was clear that these efforts were part of that broader scheme. So I think what Jamie, who's the best, was trying to say is they may not need to show, and they won't show, a direct communications, but they don't need to, because the proof is overwhelming that these were all part of the same effort to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, to interfere with the work of Congress. And he shouldn't have been surprised that when you're reaching out, telling the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by, when you know these folks are hearing your messages, that they will be armed and heavily armed. He just didn't care because they weren't there to harm him.
Yeah, it was a unified, holistic effort where everybody was aware of all of the other elements of the effort, and one of the elements of the effort were heavily armed, paramilitary trained fascist groups. Just another day at the office. Barry Burke. Sorry.
I think it's so important because it adds the violence to it that he knew. That's right. And that's something that the American people can understand. The violent overthrow of government is something that we've never seen, let alone by a president of the United States. So to see those efforts, I think really speaks volumes, and it'll be a continuation of that tomorrow at the hearings.
It is Tuesday, the 12th of July of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special, of course, is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, because it only takes a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika to make all the difference in the world. And it will. Just watch. Okay, speaking of Hungarian paprika, Orban is coming to the U.S. Hey! Apparently DeSantis and Orban really are quite fond of each other. CPAC, of course, is the venue in which Orban is finding, once again, entree into polite society, whatever that is. And DeSantis and Orban, well, as you know, should I say it? Yes, I will. Nazis of a feather, goose step together. See? Doesn't take much for me to do it. No, it doesn't. So, how are you otherwise? As the world falls apart around us. But isn't that how it's supposed to be? You look at the deep space image from the new telescope that we have 1 million miles away from us. Good thing, too. A lot of disturbances here that would mess up the image. So, yeah, if there's not order to that chaos, we're in deep trouble. And you know what? We're in deep trouble. Order is a construct of the bacteria on the backs of the backs of the backs of whatever it is that's floating around there that we call outer space. What if it's all just pond scum? I've often wondered about that, and I'm not the only one. What happens if we become so enlightened that we realize we're just like some sort of like really weird organism within a globule of pond scum? Yeah, pack that in your day cart and pack it around. Okay, so we are now at the point where we have rights stripped from us. And isn't that actually the order of the universe? You know, you get something and then you get it taken away. You breathe in and you breathe out. Okay, it's like a yin and yang. It balances, apparently. Yeah, except for at the moment that you're losing your soul and you realize, oh, well, at least I only lost half of it, so it must be okay. And then you keep losing it by half, and pretty soon, well, you've been consumed by chaotic matter in the universe. Or is it mass? No, there is a difference. Okay, so it's one of those Tuesdays. We have a hearing coming up. Thankfully, after the show. We like that. Yes, we do. Before, it was sort of like it could have been impinging upon the show, and now they set it back on the East Coast time, and it looks like we'll have it around 11 o'clock Pacific time, because that's where we are, and our locus says that's all that matters. Really? Yeah, I guess I suppose what I should do with the weather is also add Celsius to the Fahrenheit. But that means that I'd have to put on my European hat again. Really? Does it mean that? Okay. Well, did you know that we have a curated part of the show? And I could just go on and on and on, but I'm not going to, except to bring this up. Leave the Internet Archive alone, okay? It is the Library of Alexandria, and there are Mongol hordes. I don't think they were actually Mongol hordes, but there were hordes of, Cartesians who wanted to burn down the Library of Alexandria. And they were all young authors in that industry, too. They're all whining. Or not all of them. There's like a handful that, I got to tell you, aren't really that good at writers to begin with. But apparently they think the reason they're losing money is because the Internet Archive lends books to libraries. How dare they? So, let's burn it to the ground. And unfortunately, we moved the library of Netroots Radio to the Internet Archive for its, well, shall we say, stability. And it's like, better than the Library of Alexandria, so we thought. Because what is digital data except that which can just disappear? It's worse than papyrus. Or is it papyrus? It's worse than paper. That's what I'm trying to say. At least paper has some sort of permanence. Starts with a P. All right. Some permanence. Nothing is permanent. Look at that deep space image. Okay. It is quite lovely and beautiful, though, isn't it? Taken in infrared, and then they, brought the color in as the shades of infrared would, denote. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to see it. And lensing, too. Well, that's like seeing around corners and then using it as a magnifying glass in the process. I like that. And one thing should be made clear. 13 billion years is different than looking at a 13 billion year old mountain, for instance, as I found out. Because you're actually looking at what happened 13 billion years ago live. If you can, it's just reaching us and we're watching it as it happened. And that's a little bit different than, going to Yosemite and trying to find a 13 billion year old mountain because there aren't any. We're not that old. Something less than that. Anyway, it's in a way a time machine. We get to look back into time, which means that when, the Event Horizon aliens are coming to suck us into their vortex of nihilism, it's going to be too late by the time we notice it. And I was actually, it was pointed out to me that that already happened too. But we'll be seeing it soon. So we got that going for us, which is nice. Okay, what's on the rest of the menu here? As I started to bring up about the curated part of the show, because even though this universe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy might seem like chaos, there is an order to the chaos, indeed. Okay, on the rest of the menu in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, House and Senate committees are set to grill Trump-appointed IRS Chief Rettig over the unusual audits of Trump's enemies. Yeah, how'd that happen? A federal judge blocked Arizona's confusing personhood abortion law. And California firefighters have gained ground against the dangerous Yosemite wildfire. Good thing, too. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Macron's sketchy Uber dealings may prompt a parliamentary inquiry in where? France. France, of course. And Shinzo Abe's complicated legacy looms large for the current Japan Prime Minister. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link. The chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, who will be attending Netroots Nation 22 in Pittsburgh in person. It's been virtual for the last couple of years, you know. And we look forward to in-person reportage from Kelly Lincoln at Netroots Nation 22. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could send us what you might spend on an espresso type coffee drink once a month, buy us a coffee or, I don't know, one of those nice juices with ginger. And send the money from that to us. We're able to pool that money with what we pull out of our own wallets. And that way we can pay our bills and fly under the radar, because apparently they still use that technology and we can fly under it because of the simple act of paying our bills. And then we can continue this resistance against the dark forces arrayed against everything well and good, not only in, America and the world, but the whole universe. It's a fight for our very survival in the cosmos, and we're not kidding. But thank you for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty. As the historical precedent was set, I think, in the 11th century? Is that where we are now? But thank you for your generosity, truly. And we wouldn't be able to do it without you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. Fancy that. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes. That gets published 10 minutes before showtime because it's in queue. You just put it in and hit the time, and it'll do it for you. And then I really try to get the show notes and links diary linked up on social media like Twitter, but you can follow me on Twitter and you can get at least the general one and find all the show notes and links that we have up there for all these many, many years. Follow the show on Twitter, yes, at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. And for now, the deep archive of the Netroots Radio Library can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org until they burn it to the ground like they did the library at Alexandria. That's what we got going for us. Yep. It's happening again. It goes in cycles. Amass all this knowledge, and then, I don't know, a bunch of know-nothings think that they know it all, and they don't want anyone else to know it. Burn it to the ground. Okay, thanks. Okay. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Washington Post by Tony Rom. Top lawmakers are preparing to question IRS Commissioner Charles Rettig privately in the coming days over reports that the tax agency may have targeted two of Trump's political enemies with extensive and rare audits. The moves by the Capitol's key tax-focused panels, the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee, come amid growing concerns that the IRS improperly subjected James B. Comey, the former director of the FBI, and Andrew McCabe, his top deputy, to unusual scrutiny after they led investigations into Trump and his 2016 campaign. Charges of treason, working with a hostile foreign power to overthrow America. Simple things like that. Jeez. The two bipartisan sessions are set to be held behind closed doors. According to two people familiar with the matter who confirmed the meetings on the condition you can't let anyone know who we are because of what? Legal sensitivity. The privacy is necessary because the IRS is limited by law from publicly disclosing information about specific taxpayers, the sources said. Well, of course. So let's find out what's going on with Comey and McCabe. The House plans to hold its gathering this week while the Senate is expected to question Rettig in the coming weeks. The IRS said in a statement that Rettig always welcomes a chance to meet with members on tax issues and routinely flags areas of potential concern for key leaders of congressional oversight committees, the Republicans on the panel, because he's a maggot Trumper. In this reporter's opinion, I suppose I should add. The two panel's leaders, Representative Richard E. Neal and Senator Ron Wyden, he's my senator here in Oregon, previously have called on the Inspector General overseeing the IRS to open its agency's watchdog and get its own probe, while Rettig spokespeople have maintained that the IRS commissioner was not aware of any political interference and had no conversations about it with Trump, who first appointed him in the post in 2018. He has been committed to running the IRS in an impartial, unbiased manner from top to bottom, IRS spokeswoman Jody Reynolds said last week. Wyden, meanwhile, said in an interview that his panel is going to have our own inquiry, adding, "We are going to do what it takes to get to the bottom of this. There are very troubling matters, and that's part of our essential oversight function." In a letter last week, Neal described the allegations as alarming, urging the IRS watchdog, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration known as TIGTA, to determine if Rettig or other top staff had prior knowledge that the agency had subjected Comey and McCabe to extensive tax reviews. Those audits, conducted under an initiative known as the National Research Program, are painstaking and rare. Roughly 15,000 taxpayers are chosen randomly for review each year, a fact that left some lawmakers and former IRS officials troubled to learn that Comey and McCabe were both chosen among millions of Americans within a few years of each other. Christie of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here on the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A federal judge in Phoenix yesterday, Monday, blocked a 2021 state personhood law that gives all legal rights to unborn children, and that abortion rights group said put providers at risk of prosecution for a variety of crimes. U.S. District Judge Douglas Ray said in his written ruling that the groups that sued to block the law are right. It is anyone's guess, as the state acknowledged, what criminal laws abortion providers may be breaking if they perform otherwise legal abortions. And that is the problem, Ray wrote. When the punitive and regulatory weight of the entire Arizona code is involved, plaintiffs should not have to guess at whether their conduct is on the right or wrong side of the law. Ray's agreed with the challengers that the law appears to be unconstitutionally vague. At least 4 other states have similar personhood laws in effect, including Missouri, Kansas, Georgia, and Alabama. It is unclear if abortions that have been halted in Arizona since the U.S. Supreme Court ruled last month that women do not have a constitutional right to abortion would restart. Abortion providers stopped virtually all procedures because of a pre-1901 banning all abortions law that may be in effect, and other laws created too much risk. At least in Pima County, where the 1901 law remains blocked, they could be legal, although Attorney General Mark Brunovich plans to ask a court to lift that order and allow enforcement because they just can't wait to beat up a bunch of women. Rays had refused to block the personhood law last year, but abortion rights groups renewed their request after Roe v. Wade was struck down. Associated Press staff bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. California firefighters gain ground in the battle against a wildfire that poses a threat to a grove of giant sequoias and a small community in Yosemite National Park last night. The Washburn fire on the western flank of the Sierra Nevada had scorched about 4.2 square miles, but was 22% contained as of late last night, according to an incident update. The fire was a threat to more than 500 mature sequoias in the park's Mariposa Grove and the nearby community of Wawona, which has been evacuated. The area in the southern portion of Yosemite was closed to visitors, but the rest of the national park remained open. Mariposa Grove and Yosemite Valley have been protected since President Abraham Lincoln signed legislation in 1864. A sprinkler system was set up within the grove to maintain moisture, and there were no reports of severe damage to any named trees, including the 30,000-year-old grizzly giant. Fortunately, the Mariposa Grove has a long history of prescribed burning, and studies have shown that these efforts reduce the impacts of high-severity unwanted fire, a National Park Service statement said. A heat advisory was issued for the Central Valley. Sprawling below the Sierra, while up in the fire area, the high temperature of 96 degrees Fahrenheit was recorded for the village of Wawona, where hundreds of tourists and residents were forced to evacuate last Friday. Well, that's good news. And it is now time for us to go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
And welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your fast-track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today, we'll look at how new Omicron subvariants are already increasing cases and hospitalizations.
And we'll try and figure out if fall vaccine boosters should contain standard Omicron or some of those new subvariants instead. It's the height of summer here, and we were kind of hoping for a break, but we're already seeing another COVID surge. This time, it's driven by Omicron subvariants BA5 and BA4. What do we know about them so far?
Yeah, Josh, well, unfortunately, the lull after the last surge didn't last very long. BA4 and BA5 are offshoots of the Omicron variant, a version of which caused a massive wave earlier this year. BA5, and to a lesser extent BA4, now make up more than 70% of COVID infections in the US. And they are the most capable of evading our immune response from vaccination or infection of any variant so far.
Now you have me worried. Do we know if these subvariants are causing more severe disease?
Well, we do know that we're seeing upticks in hospitalizations in countries around the world, including here in the US. The variants appeared to cause more severe disease in hamsters, but there's not yet clear evidence of this in people. But the more people who get infected, the more people who will end up in the hospital. It's just numbers.
Right. Even if the portion of severe disease stays the same, the absolute number will climb along with these infections. Now, the subvariants are already dominant in some countries. Can we learn anything from those places about what might happen here?
Well, it's hard to make direct comparisons because each country has its own patchwork of immunity to the virus. But we can see a clear pattern elsewhere. BA4 and BA5 were first seen in South Africa, and then in Portugal, where they caused a spike in hospitalizations, despite the country's high vaccination rate. This is now happening in many other countries.
And previous infections don't appear to protect against these variants as well, do they?
That's right. People who had the original Omicron variant, BA1, seem to have a higher rate of reinfection with these newer Omicron subvariants compared to those infected with previous variants. That's troubling because it seems like hybrid immunity from vaccination plus infection no longer seems to last that long.
So are we just going to keep getting COVID over and over and over again?
Well, possibly, unless vaccine makers can develop new booster shots that target Omicron subvariants. That could improve our protection. It seems likely the US could face another fall or winter COVID wave. But we could have better booster shots to ward it off. Josh, what are the chances of that?
It does look like better boosters are coming, Tanya. The question is whether they'll get here in time to stop that fall wave that you mentioned. And the timing seems to depend on what vaccine makers put in the shots.
So what are the choices?
Well, both Moderna and Pfizer began developing shots with the ancestral Omicron variant months ago, and Moderna has already said those could be ready by August. But the FDA and its Vaccine Advisory Committee just said that the new boosters should be built around the new subvariants, BA4 and BA5. And the vaccine makers say that those shots, which they're just starting to test, wouldn't be ready until October.
But that will be too late to fend off a fall wave. Why pick the slower route?
Because it looks like boosters using BA4 and 5 will protect people better, since those subvariants are the ones dominating new infections right now. So they'll either be the ones circulating in the fall, or those fall viruses will be very similar. The FDA wanted boosters that are more likely to produce antibodies that neutralize the subvariants. And lab tests indicate that vaccines built around ancestral Omicron don't do that well enough. The subvariants are just different enough from their ancestor to evade an Omicron-prompted immune response. The idea behind the boosters is to trigger broader-based immunity. So the shots contain genetic material from the original SARS-CoV-2 virus, the one that hit us in early 2020, as a foundation. And then they add in material from the new subvariants. It's basically teaching your immune system to respond to a wider spectrum of virus versions.
So this is kind of a race against time, and virologists are hoping the boosters are so effective they can stop or slow down a new wave.
Yes, it's a race. I think the FDA was convinced by data showing that people infected by ancestral Omicron were getting reinfected by the subvariants. So they were afraid that the same kind of thing would happen if they rolled out old Omicron-based boosters. Health officials were also worried that people wouldn't get such boosters. That's already a problem. 3/4 of people eligible for boosters have not gotten them, and there seems to be a perception that the shots, based on the 2020 virus are outdated. Peter Marks, who runs the FDA's vaccine office, says he hopes effective boosters against the latest subvariants will convince a lot more people that the shots are up to date and they should roll up their sleeves.
What happens, though, if the fall virus is some new, really different version? New versions seem to keep turning up every couple of months.
It is a bit of a gamble, but Trevor Bedford, an evolutionary biologist at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, thinks it's a good bet the fall virus will be pretty similar. He tracks the way the virus mutates and says all the recent changes keep new versions within the Omicron branch of the virus family tree. Since those versions have been wildly successful at spreading, he expects that trend to continue. And this summer, vaccine makers and the FDA will be testing those new boosters to make sure they are just as successful at keeping up.
Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us. Our show is edited by Jeff Del Vicio and Tulika Bose.
We're going to take a short summer break for the next 2 weeks.
Even in a pandemic, you need some time off.
Especially in a pandemic.
But we'll be back the first week of August with a new episode of COVID Quickly.
And check out SciAm.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Good eating habits developed in childhood can last a lifetime, but getting children to eat their fruits and vegetables is a common problem. Eating them adds important nutrients, helps control weight, and reduces the risks for many serious illnesses. Children in the U.S. are eating more fruit. However, 60% of children get fewer fruits than recommended, and 93% don't get enough vegetables. Childcare, schools, and school districts can help change this by meeting or exceeding federal nutrition standards for meals and snacks, including fruits and vegetables wherever food is offered, and helping children learn about and taste fruits and vegetables. At home, parents can eat a variety of fruits and vegetables with their children and provide them as snacks, even if it takes many tries. Also, parents can include their children when shopping for, growing, and preparing fruits and vegetables. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For the most accurate health information, visit www.cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Perhaps you remember Senator Barry Goldwater, the GOP's fringy far-right-wing 1964 presidential nominee, who famously said, "Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice." Today, however, the core of the Republican Party has gone so far beyond the fringe that they would boo Goldwater's right-wingism as insufficiently rabid. Instead, their new rallying cry is, "Nuttiness in the defense of extremism is no vice." The GOP's mainline officialdom now proclaim themselves the party of extremism. They are openly embracing the crazy, including conspiracy theorists, neo-Confederates, and QAnon cultists, hoping to harness the fanatical horsepower of these anti-democratic groups to the party's true purpose of entrenching the supremacy of corporate and moneyed elites. Now, this extremism is about to erupt in the GOP's presidential primary, for a whole covey of these cooling right-wingers have fantasies of taking the group's radical agenda to the White House. All of them are trying to out-extreme each other with raw meat bigotry and autocratic posturing. But two wannabes have emerged as both the most bullish and bullying: Greg Abbott of Texas and Ron DeSantis of Florida. For months, these big state governors have been locked in a far-right cook-off, including outlawing free speech, banning books, viciously attacking immigrants, preempting local elections and governments, and denying health care to poor people. Bear in mind that Abbott and DeSantis are not merely pontificating, posturing, and promising what they might do in the White House. As governors, they're actually practicing it right now. This is Jim Hightower saying, I don't know if Abbott and DeSantis are the worst that the GOP can do, but pay attention, for today's Republican elites intend to pull our democracy down into the plutocratic, autocratic, and theocratic maelstrom they're creating. Howdy-ho, folks. Thanks for tuning in and sharing my weekly commentaries. Also, please join me for a live web show I host every other Tuesday, the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour at the Chat and Chew Cafe. You can join the action live online as I chat with grassroots leaders and progressive sparklies from around the country. Go to hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew to find out about upcoming guests and watch past episodes. That's hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew.
Welcome to 60 Seconds Civics from the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. The Declaration of Independence states that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. But what does unalienable rights mean? In the final draft of the Declaration of Independence, edited by Congress, the word inalienable was inadvertently changed to unalienable by a copyist. Inalienable rights are rights that we are unable to give up, even if we want to. According to the concept of inalienable rights found in the Declaration of Independence, liberty is such a right. That means that if we signed a contract to be a slave, we would not have an obligation to keep it. And despite the contract, no one would have a right to our services. Having rights that are inalienable does not mean they cannot be attacked by our being arbitrarily killed, imprisoned, or otherwise oppressed. It means that such acts are not morally justified, and that we have a ground for moral complaint. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day that miners in Bisbee, Arizona were rounded up, taken by train, and left in the desert on the New Mexico-Arizona border. The Phelps Dodge Corporation was one of the largest mining conglomerates in the United States, mining mostly copper. It had a major operation in Bisbee, Arizona. As in other mines, workplace conditions were poor. The IWW began efforts to organize the miners and had success organizing Mexican and Eastern European miners. In June, the IWW presented the copper companies with a list of demands that included better working conditions and better company housing. The copper companies refused to negotiate, and by the end of the month, about half of all miners were on strike. Phelps Dodge decided to use the war as a pretext to crack down on the IWW. Newspapers accused the organization of pro-German sympathy because the IWW opposed American involvement in World War I. A group of Bisbee elites, the Citizens Protective League, decided to round up the Wobblies and ship them out. In 1985, in an oral history, Walter Douglas, the grandson of Phelps Dodge founder James Douglas, and a witness to the deportation, made light of it, saying, "So then, they backed a cattle train in on that siding by the ballpark, loaded them all in, and sent them to Columbus, New Mexico. And when they got them over there, they deported 1,200 and some people. I was 7 years old at the time, and our house was up on a hill. And I remember the babysitter we had taking my brother and I up there in the window, and we could watch them going down Bisbee Road." The Bisbee deportation crushed the miners' union and is yet another example of the workers' struggle for a better tomorrow. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 68 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high much cooler than yesterday. We are only expecting a high of 98 to 100. We here at the mothership experienced, at least at one part of the mothership, 112 degrees was the top temp here at the mothership. And we expect to have temperatures around 98 to 100 at various parts of the mothership because, hey, the sun side and the shade side are decidedly different. And we remain under that active heat advisory until 11 p.m. tonight. Looks like we'll have sunshine, then a few afternoon clouds, and winds will be out of the northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour. Mostly cloudy skies this evening will become partly cloudy after midnight, lows in the low 60s, well, thankfully. Winds will be out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10, and some clouds in the morning will give way to mainly sunny skies in the afternoon with highs in the low 90s. Oh, we're dropping precipitously. I'll need to get a sweater. Winds will be out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County have not been updated, but I'm going to give you the current totals anyway, just to remind ourselves that this new Omicron BA.5 variant is dangerous, and hospitals are filling up, and all the usual suspects in all the usual places who refuse to do anything at the very get-go and who have suffered tremendously are about to suffer again because everybody wants it to go away. And I got to tell you, it doesn't care. Wear a mask, wash your hands, social distance, all the old things apply. Please. We have confirmed cases standing at 471,078. And our deceased stands at 555. Well, grass pollen is rated high right outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is good at 30 parts per million. And the daytime UV index remains very high at level 9. And you know what to do. You have to take care of that skin. Do it. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.87 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 84%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that crowdsources from around the world. London is 86 and partly cloudy. Paris is 91 degrees and sunny. Rome is 88 and fair. Kyiv is 63 and cloudy. Kabul is 78 and clear. Hong Kong is 85 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 75 with heavy rain. Sydney, Australia is 53 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 56 degrees and cloudy with a fog advisory on the bay and offshore. And New York is a sweltering 81 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that crowdsources from around the world. Rick Nowak of the Washington Post brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. French President Emmanuel Macron is facing public criticism and parliamentary scrutiny after a trove of documents detail close links between him and Uber during his time as France's economy minister. We urgently need to be able to get clarity and to draw the consequences, said Alexis Corbière, the vice president of the main far-left party's parliamentary group, who suggested a special inquiry beyond the debates expected in the French National Assembly and Senate this week. A president or someone who wants to become one cannot be a lobbyist in the service of interests of private companies, said Corbière, according to Public Sénat, a parliamentary television channel. France's left-leaning and far-right opposition parties, emboldened by recent gains in the country's parliamentary election, jumped on the revelations on Sunday night and Monday morning, describing them as a looming state scandal and potential evidence of a collusion of interests. Macron never hid that he was an early Uber supporter, but company executives' internal messages from 2013 to 2017 suggest that his backing went far beyond what had been known publicly, and on occasion conflicted with the policies of the left-leaning government he served at the time. According to the files, Uber managers and lobbyists believe that Macron was willing to support them by pushing regulators to be less conservative in their interpretation of rules limiting the company's operations, and by attempting to ease rules that hampered the company's expansion in France. At times, Uber was even surprised by the extent of his backing.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Foster Klug and Mary Yamaguchi of the Associated Press bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Assassinated former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was perhaps the most divisive leader in recent Japanese history, infuriating liberals with his revisionist views of history and his dreams of military expansion. He was also the longest-serving and, by some estimations, the most influential. For current Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, this complicated legacy will loom large as he considers taking up his mentor's unachieved policy goals after a big win for their ruling Liberal Democratic Party in parliamentary elections on Sunday, just days after Abe's death. Kishida has gained considerable political strength, riding a surge of emotion and vows of resilience from voters after the assassination, but he's also lost the most powerful force in his party, Abe. Kishida made his immediate priorities clear after the election. Party unity is more important than anything else, he said, but he also must make quick progress on growing worries over rising prices and a stagnant economy, even as he tries to figure out how to boost Japan's defense in the face of an aggressive China, Russia, and North Korea. And then there's Abe's polarizing nationalistic agenda, many of which was left unfinished, including his attempts to boost patriotism in schools, to revoke the apologies made in the 1990s over Japanese aggression during World War II, and the controversial and divisive plan to revise Japan's war-renouncing constitution to give the military more power. How Kishida deals with Abe's still considerable political presence may determine his success as leader. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.